There was a time. There was a time when the Church of Jesus Christ thrived in the world. A time when the Great Commission, as mentioned here in Matthew 28, was dramatically fulfilled. Rodney Sparks, in his wonderful look at Christianity and its development over history in a book titled The Triumph of Christianity, says that from 40 A.D., let this sink in, from 40 A.D. to 350 A.D., the Christian community grew by 32 million people. In 40 A.D., there were a few thousand Christians. By 350 A.D., there were 32 million Christians, 53% of the Roman Empire. Another Christian thinker echoes that when he writes, those first disciples were on fire. Nothing could stop them. Within 300 years, the gospel revolution had conquered the Roman Empire and changed the known world. That was then. And now is now. We live now, according to one Christian thinker, in the great decline of religion and Christianity. And if you don't believe that, listen to the statistics. 25 to 30% of the American people now characterize themselves as none, N-O-N-E, the nuns. They have no interest in and no commitment to organized religion whatsoever, and especially the church. 25 to 30% of the American population are nuns, unapologetically nuns, and that number is growing. David Kinnaman, in his wonderful book, Why Young People Are Leaving the Church, says that 7 of 10 young adults have minimal interest in religion or in Christianity. The Christian Century, one of the most important Christian periodicals of our time, says that unbelief is the third largest religion in the world. Unbelief is the third largest religion in the world. Since 2012, let this sink in, since 2012, 7.5 million Americans have detached themselves from religion altogether. In the last 3 years, 7.5 million Americans have removed themselves from anything that we might call religious faith. The number of people who no longer pray has gone from 14% a few years ago to 17% now, and that number is climbing. We fool ourselves if we believe that the modern church has it made. And we fool ourselves if we believe that we don't have to do something in order to reach a world that is highly secular. And I don't say that with condemnation. I'm not condemning our secular world. But I am calling our attention this morning to what we must do as the church if we're going to reach the world as Christ has called us to do. Let me share 5 insights of what we need to do. First of all, we can and should stand on our convictions. It would be awfully easy for the church to capitulate to a culture that demands that we do things the way the culture wants us to do things. It would be awfully easy for the church to play into the mindset of a secular culture that says if only you would do X, then we might pay attention. But I want to say to you this morning that we are called to unapologetically but lovingly stand on the convictions that are the foundation of who we are as the people called Christian. Let me tell you what I think the 6 essential convictions of our faith are. Here they are. That God exists and is actively at work in our lives and in our world. That God is creator. Now, however he did it isn't the issue, but he is the creator. That the 10 Commandments stand as an eternal moral and spiritual code for us all. That Jesus is God's Son and the one whose truths all humanity needs to hear and to heed. That sharing Jesus with the world is our call as long as we do it in love. That the church is ordained by God as a primary vessel for his work in the world. I categorically believe that you and I, with loving spirits, in this age that is calling the church to question, should stand up, must stand up for our convictions. But now, having said that, listen to me carefully. The second insight: we must avoid moral and spiritual absolutism. We're not going to reach the world with absolutist mindsets and absolutist actions. Some years ago in another church, a man visited our congregation. This just a few years ago. Visited our congregation. And I later learned that he went to Sunday school and he went to worship, and then told the friend who had invited him to that congregation where I was the pastor that he would never come back again. So the friend told me a few days into the week that his friend who had visited a Sunday school class, a young adult Sunday school class, and our worship services, told the guy who had invited him, "I'll never be back to that church." Well, naturally that concerned me, so I got the email from the church member to contact the young adult friend who had visited, and I sent him an email inquiring as to what had happened that had led him so quickly to say, "I'll never be back at that church." Let me read you his response. "I liked your worship service, but I was greatly dismayed at what happened in the younger adult Sunday school class. When I expressed my opinion, somewhat contrary to the overall mood of the class, I was made to feel like my questions, my doubts, my uncertainties weren't welcome. I certainly don't claim to have all the answers. I consider myself a person of Christian commitment, but that doesn't mean I feel I have to toe the line by some narrow view of things. I do want to honor Scripture. I do want to discover as best anyone can God's intention. But also I want a church where I'm free to raise questions, free to press different viewpoints, free to believe that there just might be more than one way for followers of Christ to see things. I didn't find that in your church." Wow. What an indictment. If somebody comes to a congregation, whether Methodist or some other denomination, and wants to have an honest conversation about what one can or should believe, wants to perhaps disagree with the way somebody else feels about things, and that person is made to feel unequivocally unwelcome because he or she expresses doubts or uncertainties or questions, we have no chance reaching the world if the world feels like, and you've heard me say this before, that we don't care about where they are. We still can stand on our convictions, but we cannot be absolutist. We just talked about 175 years that this congregation has been effective and faithful and fruitful here in the Germantown area. We're part of a grand experience known as Methodism. And you do realize, don't you, that at the heart of Methodism are these attributes: that we listen, that we're tolerant, that we're open-minded. One of the strengths of Methodism has always been that we let people express their perspective, express their own personal relationship with God, define for us how they experience God, and we will affirm that, whether it's ours or not. One of my favorite sayings of John Wesley is about changing his mind. He wrote this: "When I was young, I was sure of everything. In a few years, having been mistaken 1,000 times, I was not half so sure of most things as I was before. At present, I am hardly sure of anything except what God has fully made clear to everyone." Oh, I like that. The Richard Smith would never say, beyond the essentials, that I'm convinced that I have the answers and you don't, or you have the answers and I don't, or we have the answers and somebody else doesn't. We have no chance reaching the world when we're absolutist. Which leads to my third insight. We need to see the world, people, issues through the eyes of God, which are the eyes of compassion. Many of you know the name David Platt. Some of you probably read his books. I think some Sunday school classes have studied David Platt's books. He's written a couple of books. He's written a new book called Counterculture. And in that book, and I just began to read this book, in that book, Platt talks about having your convictions but living them out with compassion. Oh, I like that. That you have your convictions, but you live them out with compassion. And compassion, as David Platt defines it, is seeing people, seeing issues through the eyes of God. And he writes these penetrating words in that book. One of my hopes is that God would give us grace to see what he sees, to see the poor, the hungry, and the neglected as he sees them, to care for the baby in the womb as well as the baby's mother as God cares for them, to love the orphan and the widow, the homosexual and the heterosexual, the immigrant and the immoral as God loves them. And I love the way Pope Francis has said it. The church's very credibility is seen in how she shows merciful and compassionate love. Mercy is the very foundation of the church's life. I guarantee you that if people felt from the life of the church compassion, sensitivity to where they are in their life journey, they wouldn't have an issue with the church. We might not agree on all the beliefs. We might have different views on how one understands and interprets the Bible, but if compassion permeated out from the people called Christian, and those who experience us came to believe that we do see them through the eyes of God, we wouldn't have the problem that we now have with the church. Fourth thing, we need to avoid simplistic solutions to life's tough questions and issues. I stumbled across a blog recently by a self-acclaimed Christian psychologist. And she has a blog that's titled, a blog that she calls a spiritual mental health plan. And it's grounded in Lamentations 3:23, which goes like this: remove bad thoughts and wire in new ones. That's not bad in itself. Remove bad thoughts and wire in new ones. And she goes on to talk about how if we just think positively and we let God work in us so we think positively, then we can settle all the issues of life for the most part. She goes on to say this: you can overcome learning issues. You can get the chaos in your mind under control. If you wired those toxic thoughts in, you can wire those toxic thoughts out. You don't have to fear that if a condition runs in your family that you're going to get it, for example, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or depression. You can overcome and control depression and anxiety. You can even control and overcome schizophrenia and OCD. Get real. I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in the discipline of faith. I believe that God can do extraordinary things in our lives through prayer and through faith. But the idea that if I just have enough faith and I just think positively enough, I'm going to overcome schizophrenia, and I'm going to overcome obsessive-compulsive disorder is ludicrous. My wife is a practitioner in psychiatry, and I guarantee you that she sees once a month when she goes to Mayfield, back to the clinic where she worked before we came here, she sees people who without medication could not be whole, would not find healing, who without the gift of medical science and medical discovery could not find wholeness and happiness in their lives. When the world sees us antagonistic to science, the world turns its back on us. Now listen to me. I believe in prayer. I believe in faith. I believe on the difference positive thinking can play in our lives. But anyone who propagates the idea that faith is going to undo all the real life issues that people sincerely face does not help us. I believe that you with me value science. I believe that you with me value medical research. And I believe that you with me believe that's a gift from God. Is medicine any less a gift from God than faith or prayer? Is science any less a gift from God than faith or prayer or worship? I don't think so. I think they're all venues through which God can change our lives. But we have to avoid sending the message that there are simplistic solutions to complex problems. Finally, this. We must continue to make this world a better place. I am so proud of our Caldwell Guthrie effort, just as you are. Jackie Flom sent me this week the latest results of this past year's Team Read program, helping second graders advance in their reading skills. It's phenomenal, the advancement that's been made through those volunteers and the reading abilities of second grade kids, the vast majority of whom come out of disadvantaged homes. It's really phenomenal, the results. I think we began that ministry in 2010, so it's been about 5 years now. And all the volunteers, many of you here this morning, you have done an inordinate, wonderful work in enhancing the lives of second graders who have a better chance now because they can read more proficiently. I was inspired to that by an article I read titled, "I Wish My Teacher Knew." A third grade teacher in Denver, Colorado named Kyla Schwartz decided that she really didn't know what her students' lives were like. 92% of the students that she teaches are in free lunch programs, so they are truly disadvantaged. She realized she didn't know their stories, their lives, so she asked them in a reading lesson to answer this question. I wish my teacher knew. Third grade kids. Listen to some of the answers. I wish my teacher knew I don't have a friend to play with. I wish my teacher knew I don't have pencils at home to do my homework. I wish my teacher knew how much I miss my dad because he got deported to Mexico when I was 3 years old and I haven't seen him in 6 years. I wish my teacher knew sometimes my reading log is not signed because my mother is not around a lot. I wish my teacher knew I don't get extra homework and study help at home, and on the sad stories go about third graders in that Denver, Colorado school who have a rough life. Thank God there are Christian folk who believe that to honor Jesus, we've got to change this world for the better. Thank God there are Christian folk right here who believe that we're not honoring Jesus if we don't get out in the world, empowered by him, and change the world for the better. And listen to me again. The world will wake up to the church when the church wakes up to a hurting world. There are people out there who may not come to belief right away, but they'll come to a loving people. And they'll come where they see the witness being spread by our actions out in the world. And if they come, it just might be they come to believe. 175 years old. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? Long, rich history. Don't you want another 175 years? Don't you want the witness of Germantown Church to be vibrant and vital decade after decade after decade? Well, we fool ourselves again if we believe that's going to happen accidentally. It's going to happen as we are attentive to some key things. Yes, let's share our convictions. Let's stand strong on that which we affirm as people called Christian. But let's do so without absolutism. Let's do so without pointing the finger at somebody and saying, you can't be right because I don't agree. And let's look at people and issues through the eyes of God, eyes of compassion. Let's avoid those simplistic answers that run people off instead of invite people in. And in the love of Jesus, let's change this world for the better. And the world will pay attention. Thanks be to God.